The federal courthouse in Hartford in February is a building that seems designed to communicate permanence. Heavy stone, high ceilings, the particular quality of institutional silence that reminds you, in case you had forgotten, that you are in a place where consequences are made official. I sat in the third row on the left side. Christopher sat beside me. He had cooperated fully with the investigation, as I had asked. His attorneys had negotiated his status as a cooperating witness, which meant he would not face charges for what had been done without his knowledge and over his signature. He had spent 6 weeks giving depositions that were, by all accounts, thorough and honest and painful. He looked like someone who had been through something that could not be fully described, which is what he was. Victoria sat at the defendant's table. She was still beautiful. She would, I suspected, always be beautiful. It was the kind of beauty that does not require effort because it has been constructed so carefully over so many years that it has become structural. But the precision she usually wore like armor was different today, slightly worn at the edges. The way things look when they have been under pressure longer than they were designed to sustain. Her attorney was excellent. He delivered an opening statement that was a masterwork of reframing, describing Victoria as a woman who had made desperate choices in an impossible situation, a devoted daughter trying to protect a dying father, a woman who had lost perspective but had never intended harm. It was, I had to acknowledge, a genuinely skilled performance. Then the prosecutor stood. She was 41 years old and had the bearing of someone who has spent enough time looking at financial fraud that she has lost all patience for the performance of innocence. She walked to the center of the courtroom and said, without preamble, "Ladies and gentlemen, the defense would like you to believe that this is a story about a daughter's love for a sick father. It is not. It is a story about 41 transactions over 14 months, totaling $23.4 million, taken from a fund that was supposed to save children's lives. We will show you every transaction. We will show you every authorization, and we will show you the children who were supposed to be helped by the device that will now be years delayed because the money that was supposed to build it was in an account in the Cayman Islands." The courtroom was very quiet. I looked at Christopher. His jaw was set. His hands were flat on his knees. He was breathing carefully, the way people breathe when they are managing something that would otherwise be unmanageable. I put my hand over his. He looked at me. His eyes were wet, but his face was steady. "You okay?" I said quietly. He said, "No." "That's the right answer," I said. The testimony lasted 4 days. Richard Holt testified about the financial analysis. His delivery was unhurried and precise and utterly devastating. The testimony of a man who has spent decades explaining complex things to people who need to understand them and has learned that clarity is the most powerful instrument available. Diana Torres testified about the methodology. She was asked on cross-examination whether it was possible that the transactions had been authorized in error without full understanding of their implications. She said, no. The level of documentation, the account routing, the sequential authorization, the currency conversion records, indicates a sophisticated and sustained intentional process. This is not what error looks like. Victoria testified on the third day. She was composed and precise until the prosecutor reached the emails, the internal correspondence between Victoria and the contact at Meridian Health Ventures, the entity that had received the redirected funds. The emails showed a conversation that extended over 11 months. They showed familiarity, negotiation, and in several instances, explicit reference to the fact that Christopher doesn't need to know the details. Victoria's composure fractured at that moment. Not dramatically, not with tears or outbursts, just a small, barely visible fracture, the way fine china fractures before it breaks, in a line so thin it is almost invisible until suddenly it is not. She looked at Christopher. He did not look away, and in the sustained eye contact between them, a husband and wife who had built a life together and were now sitting on opposite sides of the most consequential moment of that life, I saw something that I had not expected to see. Grief. Not guilt exactly. Not remorse exactly. Grief. The grief of someone who has understood, too late, the full cost of what they chose. I understood something in that moment that I had not understood before. Victoria had loved my son. Whatever else was true, that had been true. And she had made a choice that had destroyed it. Not because she had not known it would cost something, but because she had believed, in the way that people believe things when they are desperate enough, that she could manage the cost, that she could keep the fraud contained, that she could protect her father and her marriage and her life simultaneously if she was careful enough. She had not been careful enough, but she had been trying, in her way, to hold something together. I did not forgive her. Forgiveness is not something that happens in a moment. It is something that happens slowly, over time, in the quiet spaces between difficult things. I was not there yet, but I understood her. And understanding, I had learned over 72 years, is where everything that matters eventually begins. The verdict came on the fourth day. Guilty on all counts. Victoria sat very still when the word was spoken. Her attorney put a hand on her arm. She did not move. She was looking at something in the middle distance that was not visible to anyone else in the room. The judge sentenced her to 9 years. She would serve a minimum of 6. Her assets, the ones that could be tied to the fraudulent transfers, were to be liquidated. A portion would be returned to the research fund. The pediatric cardiac monitoring device project, the judge noted, was being taken over by a consortium of hospital foundations and would be fully funded within the year. I listened to that last part and felt something move through my chest that was not quite relief and not quite vindication. Something quieter and more complete than either of those things. The children will have their device, I thought. That was the point. Christopher came to my apartment 3 days after the verdict. He came the way people come when they are carrying something they have been carrying for a long time and have finally decided they cannot carry it alone anymore, without announcement, without plan, simply by appearing at the door. I opened it, and he stood there in the hallway in the gray February light, and I looked at my son. Really looked at him, the way you look at someone when you are trying to see past the surface to what is actually there. And I saw something I had not seen in years. He looked like himself. Not the Christopher of the Christmas dinner, or the corporate headshots, or the carefully managed public presence. The Christopher Word had driven to his first day of high school. The Christopher who had called me from his dorm room at 2 a.m. junior year because he was failing organic chemistry and was certain his life was over. The Christopher who had, at age 8, come into my room after a nightmare and said, "Mom, I'm scared." And I had said, "I know. Come sit with me." And we had sat together until the fear passed, the way things do when you are not facing them alone. He sat at my kitchen table. I made coffee, too strong, the way he always made it. I was trying. We sat across from each other in the gray light of a February morning in Hartford, Connecticut, and we did not say anything for a long time. Then Christopher said, "I keep thinking about what I said at the Christmas dinner." "You didn't say much," I said. "That's the part I keep thinking about." I wrapped both hands around my mug. Outside, a thin snow was beginning to fall, the light kind that does not accumulate. "Christopher," I said, "you were caught between 2 things that both mattered to you. You chose wrong. People do that. What matters is what you do after." "I chose wrong for a long time," he said. "Yes." "I let you?" He stopped. "At that dinner, the dress," Victoria said. I know what she said, and I didn't. I know. He looked at me. "Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you?" He seemed unable to finish the sentence. "You had every reason to walk away. From all of it. From me. Why didn't you?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about 37 years of cardiac nursing. About the nights I had stood at a bedside when the easiest thing, the thing that would have required the least of me, would have been to step back, to let someone else carry it, to decide that the cost was more than I was willing to pay. I had never done that. Not once. Not because I was incapable of it, but because I had learned, early and completely, that the moments when leaving is the easiest option are usually the moments when staying matters the most. I said, "Because you are my son. And because I have been in enough operating rooms to know that you don't walk away from a heart that's still beating just because it needs work." Christopher pressed his fingers against his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom." "I know you are. Is that enough?" No, I said honestly, but it's the right place to start. He looked at me. Something in his face, I thought, had changed. Not in the way that faces change when they are performing something. In the way that faces change when they have put down a weight they have been carrying so long they had forgotten it was a weight. The pediatric project, he said, the consortium that's taking it over. They've asked if I want to be involved. In what capacity? As a collaborator, not in a financial role, just consulting, contributing, being part of the reason it exists. I looked at my son. Yes, I said. You think I should? I think that's exactly what you should do. He nodded. Okay. We drank our coffee in the quiet of the February morning. Outside, the thin snow was still falling, soft and consistent, the kind that does not announce itself, but accumulates nonetheless. Spring came to Hartford, the way spring always comes to New England, reluctantly, in stages, as though the season is not entirely convinced the previous one has finished. I had, by that point, been contacted by 47 women. Not friends, not colleagues. Women I had never met, who had read Patricia's follow-up piece, a profile she had written at my request, about what had led me to the drive, what had led me to act, what I had understood, and what I had been afraid of throughout the process. Women who had found in that piece something they were looking for, though many of them could not have named it before they read it. Their letters came by email and by hand. They came from Connecticut and from Alabama and from Oregon and from places I had barely heard of. They came from women who were 34 and from women who were 81. They came from women who were in the middle of situations like mine, and from women who had been in situations like mine 20 years ago and had not acted, and were still carrying the weight of that choice. The letters said different things, but underneath the different things they said the same thing. I thought I was the only one. I was not a public figure. I was not a speaker or an activist or anyone who had chosen, deliberately, to become someone that people looked to. I was a 72-year-old retired cardiac nurse from Hartford who had picked up a USB drive at a Christmas dinner and decided not to put it back down. But something about that simplicity, I think, was exactly what resonated. I was not exceptional. I was not particularly brave. I was simply a woman who had reached the point where the cost of staying quiet was higher than the cost of speaking. And apparently, there were a great many women who had reached that point or were approaching it or had passed it years ago and were still looking for evidence that it was possible to speak and survive. I wrote back to every one of them, not with advice, not with a formula, simply with acknowledgement. I hear you. What you are carrying is real. You are not alone. In May, Richard Holt called me. The consortium has fully funded the pediatric project, he said. They're beginning production trials in September. The first units should be in clinical use within 18 months. I sat by the window of my apartment with the phone held to my ear and looked out at the May light falling on the parking lot below and felt something move through me that was, I think, as close to peace as I had come in a very long time. Thank you for telling me, I said. Mrs. Holloway, Richard said. I want to say something, if I may. Go ahead. In 23 years of forensic accounting, I have reviewed evidence in a great many cases involving financial fraud. The majority of those cases are discovered through institutional audits or whistleblowers within organizations. In my experience, private individuals, particularly individuals with a personal stake in the outcome, rarely have the discipline to handle evidence correctly, to protect the chain of custody, to do things in the right order. He paused. You did everything correctly, he said. Everything. And because of that, the case was airtight. I wanted you to know that. I said, I spent 37 years as a surgical nurse. The first thing you learn in a cardiac operating room is that procedure exists for a reason. If you skip steps because you're in a hurry, people die. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes, that's exactly right. In June, Christopher and I drove together to the site where the pediatric device would first be piloted, a children's hospital in New Haven, where I had worked briefly early in my career before I moved to Yale, New Haven and stayed. We walked through the cardiac unit. A nurse who could not have been older than 26 showed us the space where the monitoring equipment would be installed. She explained, with the specific animated confidence of someone who genuinely loves what they do. how the device would work, how it would catch arrhythmias in children who might otherwise not be diagnosed until the condition became critical. Christopher listened carefully. He asked questions, good questions, the questions of someone who understands the technical aspects and is also trying to understand the human ones. On the drive home, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I should have paid more attention." I said yes. To the company, to the fund, to what Victoria was doing, to all of those things. Yes. I kept choosing not to look closely, because if I looked closely, I might see something I didn't want to deal with. I said, "Christopher, that is one of the most human things a person can do. It is also one of the most dangerous." He said, "How do you keep paying attention when paying attention is hard?" I thought about 37 years in an operating room, about the nights when the patient on the table was a child and the procedure was complicated and the surgeon was exhausted and there were 17 reasons to let someone else carry the weight for a moment. I said, "You remember what you're there for. You remember who is depending on the attention being paid, and then you pay it." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going to be better at that." "I know you are," I said. "You're already starting." I am writing this from my apartment in Hartford. It is May. The light at this time of the year in Connecticut comes in low and gold through the window in the late afternoon, and it falls across my desk in a way that I have always found, for reasons I cannot entirely explain, consoling. On my desk, a cup of chamomile tea, a notebook I have been keeping since December, a photograph of my son and me taken last month at his niece's birthday party. A photograph in which we are both looking at the camera and both, I think, looking like people who have come through something. In September, the first pediatric cardiac monitoring devices went into clinical trial at 3 hospital systems across New England. They are, by all early reports, performing exactly as designed. I think about those children sometimes, about the particular vulnerability of a child's heart, how it beats faster than an adult's, how it responds more dramatically to both stress and care, how it is both more fragile and more resilient than any heart that comes after. I think about the parents who sit in waiting rooms while a device monitors what they cannot see, about the reassurance that comes from knowing something is watching. I know something about that, about watching, about paying attention when attention is the only thing standing between what is and what could be. Victoria is in a federal correctional facility in Massachusetts. She will be there at minimum until Christopher's daughter, who does not yet exist, but who Christopher tells me he hopes for someday, is old enough for kindergarten. I have not visited her. I am not ready for that yet. But I think about what she said on the phone. I needed that money, the rawness of it. The way that sentence contained in 4 words an entire story about desperation and love, and the terrible choices people make when they are trying to hold too many things at once. I am not ready to visit, but I am getting there. Christopher calls me every Sunday, not because I have asked him to, because he has decided to. There is a difference between those two things that I cannot fully articulate, but can feel completely. We talk about ordinary things, mostly. The device project, his work, a book we are both reading, his daughter, when she arrives, my appointment with Dr. Patterson, who tells me my heart is, for 72, in remarkable condition. Years of paying attention to it, I told him. He laughed. Sometimes Christopher asks me questions I do not have complete answers to, about Victoria, about what I think she understood and what she didn't, about whether I think people can genuinely change or whether they only learn to manage what they are. I tell him, I don't know, that in 37 years of cardiac nursing, I saw people's hearts do things that no one predicted. Stop when they should have continued. Continue when every indicator said they would stop. That I have learned not to be confident about what a heart will and will not do. He says, that's not a very reassuring answer. I say no, but it's an honest one. There is a particular moment in cardiac surgery. I am told by surgeons who have tried to describe it to people who have not seen it, when the heart, which has been stopped for the procedure, is restarted. It does not always restart immediately. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes there are setbacks. Sometimes the team holds their breath for longer than is comfortable, waiting. But it restarts. In my 37 years at the operating table, I never saw a heart that was supposed to restart fail to do so. I am sure it happens. I know the statistics. I have read the literature. But in my experience, in the rooms I stood in, when conditions were right and attention was paid and every correct thing was done in the correct order, the heart restarted. I believe that about hearts that are not in operating rooms too. I believe it about the ones that have been stopped by grief or betrayal or the particular damage that family can do to the people inside it. I believe that with attention and time and the willingness to do the hard things in the right order, they restart. I am 72 years old. I am a retired cardiac nurse from Hartford, Connecticut. I spent 37 years keeping hearts beating in rooms where the stakes were as high as stakes can be. I spilled wine on a Christmas dress. I found a USB drive. I made phone calls and told the truth and waited with the patience that 37 years of surgical nursing had given me for the correct order of things to unfold. And now I sit by a window in November light, drinking chamomile tea, listening to my son's voice every Sunday, thinking about children with monitoring devices attached to hearts that someone is watching. I am exactly where I chose to be. And that, after everything, is enough. If this story reached something in you, something that has been waiting to be acknowledged, I want you to know. What you are carrying is real. What you are seeing is real, and you are not alone in it. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is a woman who decides to stop looking away. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if there is a story you have been carrying, a truth you have not yet told, know this: the right moment is not always the most comfortable moment, but it is always the one when you are finally ready to stop waiting for permission. Thank you for staying with me.